They looked like a perfect match. Two young people, freshly married, stepping into a new city with wide smiles and big dreams. Amira Khalid and Ravi Pratap checked into a Dubai hotel one warm evening, carrying only a small overnight bag and the promise of a future together. By sunrise, one of them was dead, and the other sat trembling on the floor, whispering words no one in the hotel corridor could forget. He wouldn't stop. Before we move further, let me ask you, have you ever known a couple who seemed inseparable on the outside, yet behind closed doors, there were cracks no one wanted to admit were there? Maybe you've seen a relationship where jealousy, anger, or control quietly chipped away at love until something snapped. This story may sound distant, but it reflects patterns found in neighborhoods and families all over the world. That night in Dubai wasn't the beginning of their troubles, it was the breaking point. Witnesses later recalled hearing shouting in the early hours, a sharp sound that made at least one guest press their ear against the door. Security walked by but, finding the hallway silent, kept moving. Hours later, hotel staff would open the door to a scene they could never unsee. Ravi lay motionless, and Amira was alive but broken, repeating the same phrase over and over. Now, here's the question, was this a planned act of violence, or the desperate strike of a woman who felt trapped? That's where the heart of this case lies. And that's why today, we're going to take you inside this story, not just to recount the night itself, but to understand the fragile line between love and possession, between protection and fear. Stay with me until the end, because what unfolded after that morning didn't just shake one family. It ignited conversations across Dubai and beyond about marriage, culture, power, and survival. And before we continue, take a second to support this channel. If you're new here, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss our upcoming stories. Drop a comment below if you've ever witnessed a relationship where passion crossed into control. We want to hear your perspective. Every like, comment, and share helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. When Amira Khalid was born in Sharjah, her parents saw her as the quiet one of the family. Her father, an Emirati businessman, was a stern but devoted man, proud of his heritage. Her mother, originally from Jordan, brought a gentler influence to the household, often reminding Amira that strength did not always need to roar, it could whisper, wait, and endure. Amira grew up in a household where appearances mattered. Family reputation carried weight, and daughters were expected to balance ambition with tradition. Still, Amira carved her own path. She excelled at school, loved numbers, and after finishing her degree she found steady work as a junior accountant in a mid-sized construction firm. Colleagues described her as diligent, always on time, always polite. Yet beneath that quiet exterior was a young woman who longed for independence. Friends would later recall how often she spoke about wanting a life beyond the shadow of her family's expectations. Ravi Pratap, on the other hand, came from a different world. Born and raised in Hyderabad, India, Ravi was the eldest son in a bustling household. Where Amira was reserved, Ravi was magnetic. He laughed easily, told stories with dramatic flair, and seemed to know everyone in the room. Friends often said that when Ravi entered a space, you couldn't help but notice him. His career in IT had taken him to Dubai 2 years before the marriage, and while his family remained back in India, he became part of the city's vast expatriate network. The two met at a friend's engagement party. Accounts differ on who noticed whom first, but everyone agrees that sparks flew quickly. Ravi was drawn to Amira's quiet elegance, while Amira found in him a boldness she lacked but secretly admired. Within 6 months, Ravi proposed. To outsiders, it seemed fast. Too fast. Amira's family hesitated. Her father, in particular, worried about cultural differences. Ravi came from another faith, another background, and there were whispers of whether their union would survive in the long term. Amira's mother, though supportive, urged caution. Love is strong, she told her daughter, but it must be steady. Don't mistake a storm for passion. Still, Amira pushed forward. She told her family she had never met someone who made her feel so seen. She wanted the marriage. Against lingering doubts, the wedding went ahead, a lavish celebration in Hyderabad attended by hundreds. Photos from that day showed Ameera radiant in her bridal attire and Ravi beaming beside her. To friends watching from the sidelines, it seemed like the perfect match. But those closest to them noticed subtle cracks. A cousin later admitted that Ravi's temper showed even during the festivities. He didn't like when she spoke too long with male guests, the cousin said. It was small, but it was there. Another guest recalled Ravi growing visibly annoyed when Ameera stepped away for too long to greet her relatives. At the time, these incidents were brushed aside as normal stress during a big wedding. Yet in hindsight, they became early signs of something deeper. Once back in Dubai, the couple's life began with promise. They talked about finding an apartment, decorating it, and building their future together. Ravi's colleague said he often mentioned plans to start a family within the year. Ameera, meanwhile, kept her own worries close to her chest. Friends would later reveal WhatsApp conversations where she admitted Ravi had a jealous streak. In one message, just 2 weeks before the wedding, she wrote, "He shouts when he's angry, but he says he loves me. Maybe it will get better after marriage." Those words carried the weight of so many women who hope a wedding ring might soften hard edges. But in Ameera's case, it wouldn't. Their honeymoon phase was brief. Friends in Dubai noticed Ameera withdrawing. She stopped attending social gatherings she once enjoyed. Ravi, meanwhile, grew more possessive. He questioned her about co-workers, grew agitated if she didn't answer his calls quickly, and once stormed into her office to demand why she was laughing with a male colleague. That colleague would later testify, he wasn't joking. He was serious. You could see it in his eyes. One evening, Ameera's younger brother, visiting Dubai for school, met the couple at a cafe. During their meal, a small disagreement over the bill escalated. Ravi gripped Ameera's wrist tightly, hard enough to leave a mark. The brother confronted him, but Ameera quickly smoothed it over, insisting everything was fine. "It's just how he is," she said, brushing it off. Yet her brother couldn't forget the fear he saw flicker in her expression. Red flags had surfaced, but Ameera kept moving forward. Perhaps it was denial, perhaps love, perhaps the pressure of proving everyone wrong who doubted the match in the first place. Whatever the reason, she chose to endure. That endurance came to a critical moment when, just 3 weeks after their wedding, they booked a single night at the Al Noor Grand Hotel in Dubai. To outsiders, it looked like a simple stopover, a short stay before securing their own apartment. But for Ameera, the walls of room 307 would soon close in as a storm-long brewing finally reached its peak. The night that followed would leave one life ended, the other forever altered, and a city questioning how far love can bend before it breaks. The Al Noor Grand Hotel was quiet that night. Guests drifted in and out of the lobby, taxis pulled up to the entrance, and the staff behind the front desk prepared for another uneventful evening. On the 3rd floor, room 307 was just one of many doors lining the carpeted hallway. Nothing about it stood out, until the early hours of the morning. Around 1:30 a.m., a couple staying 2 doors down heard shouting. The man's voice was louder, clipped with anger. A heavy thud followed, sharp enough to jolt the couple from their half-sleep. The woman nudged her husband, urging him to call the front desk. Instead, he stepped into the hallway. By then, silence had already returned. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning remained. A security guard patrolling the floor walked past minutes later. He paused outside room 307, listened for a moment, then decided against knocking. No sound, no problem, he later explained. It was a choice that would haunt him. By 9 a.m., the housekeeping shift had begun. A maid approached room 307 with fresh linens. She knocked once, then twice. No answer. Following hotel protocol, she retrieved the master key. When the door clicked open, the scene inside stopped her cold. On the bed lay Ravi Pratap, motionless, his shirt soaked in blood that had seeped deep into the sheets. His eyes were open but vacant, his chest bearing the unmistakable wound of a knife strike. Just a few feet away, Amira Khalid sat on the carpet near the balcony, knees pulled to her chest. Her abaya was stained red, her hands trembling. Over and over, she whispered in a low voice, "He wouldn't stop, he wouldn't stop." The maid screamed. Within minutes, hotel staff crowded the hallway, and security called the police. Dubai emergency services arrived swiftly, medics confirming Ravi was dead. Amira, pale and shaking, offered no resistance as officers escorted her out of the room. Investigators moved quickly. The room was sealed, and forensic teams began their sweep. A kitchen knife lay on the minibar counter, its blade marked with blood. Fingerprints belonging to both Amira and Ravi were lifted. The sheets were collected, as were Amira's clothes. Photographs captured every angle, the spilled water glass near the bed, the half-eaten naan on the tray, Ravi's phone on the bedside table, its screen cracked as if thrown. The autopsy confirmed Ravi's death was caused by a single stab wound to the chest. The blade had pierced directly into his heart. Toxicology reports later showed no alcohol or drugs in his system. For investigators, the precision of the strike raised questions. Was it a wild swing in self-defense, or had she delivered a deliberate, targeted blow? Amira was taken into custody that same morning. During her first interrogation, her voice was soft but steady. She admitted to stabbing Ravi but insisted it was not premeditated. According to her account, Ravi had locked the hotel door, accusing her of lying to him and being unfaithful. She described how he grabbed her arm, slapped her, and blocked her attempts to leave. "I only wanted him to stop," she said. "I was afraid. I thought he would kill me." When pressed on why she had not called for help afterward, Amira faltered. She admitted she froze, unable to think clearly. "I couldn't move," she whispered. "I just sat there." Detectives noted inconsistencies. If she feared for her life, why hadn't she fled into the hallway once he was down? Why didn't she dial reception or emergency services? Instead, she stayed with his body until morning, leaving questions of intent hanging in the air. Other guests in the hotel offered partial confirmations of her story. Several reported hearing raised voices in the night. One described what sounded like a woman crying. Another insisted the noise was mostly a man shouting. These accounts supported her claim of an argument, though none had witnessed the actual violence. The security guard's statement was particularly troubling. He admitted he heard something but chose not to intervene. His hesitation became a focal point in media discussions later, with many questioning whether the tragedy could have been prevented had he knocked. News traveled fast. By afternoon, headlines across Dubai and beyond carried variations of the same shocking story. Newlywed dies in hotel bloodbath, and 1 month married, 1 life ended. The combination of romance, cultural clash, and sudden violence gripped the public. On social media, opinions split. Some expressed sympathy for Amira, seeing her as a woman trapped in an abusive relationship who finally snapped. Others painted her as manipulative, arguing she had taken advantage of Ravi's trust. Comment sections filled with debates, many laced with cultural undertones about gender, marriage, and honor. In India, where Ravi's family lived, the coverage was even more raw. Local outlets portrayed him as the tragic victim of a new life gone horribly wrong. Photos from his wedding circulated alongside captions asking whether love had blinded him to danger. His parents, devastated, gave a tearful interview, "He was our only son. We sent him to Dubai for a better future. Now all we have is his body." Police did not consider any other suspects. The evidence pointed squarely at Amira, her prints on the weapon, her clothes soaked in blood, her own admission. The focus instead shifted to motive. Was this truly self-defense, or something planned? Prosecutors leaned toward the latter, noting that Amira had not attempted to summon help. They also highlighted her composed demeanor during parts of the interrogation, arguing it suggested calculation rather than panic. The defense, however, began laying groundwork early. Amira's lawyer pointed to bruises on her arms and shoulders, documented in medical reports taken hours after her arrest. These injuries, he argued, aligned with her story of being attacked. Friends and colleagues began speaking up as well. Some recalled Ravi's possessive nature, the way he reacted strongly to small slights. A female co-worker recounted how Ravi once stormed into her office after seeing Amira laugh with a male colleague. It wasn't normal, she said. It was controlling. These clashing narratives, one of a victim lashing out in desperation, the other of a wife orchestrating her husband's death, set the stage for a courtroom battle that would soon dominate public attention. When police escorted Amira Khalid from the Al Noor Grand Hotel, she was quiet, head bowed, her hands trembling but compliant. Guests lining the lobby stared in disbelief as the young bride was led into a waiting police vehicle. Hours earlier, she had been a wife starting a new chapter. Now, she was the sole suspect in her husband's violent death. By the end of that day, authorities confirmed her arrest on suspicion of homicide. The case moved quickly. In Dubai, domestic violence cases rarely drew such immediate international attention, but the shocking circumstances, a newlywed couple, the luxury hotel setting, the cultural undertones, made it impossible to treat quietly. Prosecutors charged Amira with intentional homicide, alleging she had deliberately killed Ravi Pratap. The charge carried the possibility of life imprisonment, or even harsher penalties if the court accepted it as premeditated. To them, the evidence was damning. The weapon was taken from the room's minibar tray. The single stab wound was direct and lethal, striking the heart. Amira had not sought help for nearly 8 hours after the stabbing. For prosecutors, these elements suggested more than panic, they painted a picture of conscious choice. The defense countered immediately. Amira's lawyer argued she was the victim of sustained domestic abuse, cornered with no escape. She was not plotting, he said at a preliminary hearing. She was surviving. Medical records of bruises on her arms and shoulders supported her claims, and testimonies from friends who had seen Ravi's jealous streak added credibility to her defense. The trial opened to a packed courtroom. Rows of journalists filled the benches, scribbling every detail. Ravi's parents sat in the front, faces etched with grief, clutching a framed photo of their son. Behind them, women's advocacy groups rallied quietly, wearing pins that read, "Justice for Amira." The prosecution's opening statement was direct, this was not a moment of fear. This was an act of rage. They emphasized the silence after the stabbing. Why had Amira remained in the room for hours? Why hadn't she knocked on a neighbor's door? Why hadn't she called reception? Because, the prosecutor argued, she had already decided the outcome. The defense opened differently, appealing not just to the court but to the human conscience. What would you do, her lawyer asked, if the person you trusted most in the world turned on you violently in a locked room? What choices remain when your cries are ignored, and the blows do not stop? Prosecutors presented evidence in stark detail. The knife's placement on the minibar suggested it had been picked up intentionally. The precision of the wound hinted at control, not chaos. They called witnesses to underscore their point. The security guard testified that he had heard nothing after his brief stop in the hallway. The prosecutor seized on this, suggesting Amira's claim of an ongoing struggle was exaggerated. A forensic expert testified that Ravi was likely lying on the bed at the moment of the stabbing, not in an active altercation, based on blood pattern analysis. Perhaps most damaging was the argument about motive. Prosecutors hinted at cultural conflict between the families and suggested Amira may have entered the marriage reluctantly, only to regret her decision. This was not a woman with no options, they argued. This was a woman who chose violence instead of honesty. Amira's defense relied on both evidence and emotion. They submitted medical reports documenting bruises consistent with her claims of being struck that night. They presented WhatsApp messages from Amira to her friends, where she confided in them about Ravi's temper weeks before the wedding. One message read, "He shouts when he's angry, but I believe he loves me. Maybe it will get better." They also called witnesses who had observed Ravi's controlling behavior. A female co-worker described the day Ravi stormed into her office, demanding to know why Amira was laughing with a colleague. Amira's younger brother testified about the cafe incident where Ravi had gripped her wrist so hard it left marks. "I told her to leave him," the brother said on the stand. But she said it was too late. The defense leaned heavily on the context of domestic abuse, arguing that cultural stigma kept Amira silent until the moment she felt her life was in danger. She was not plotting his death, her lawyer insisted. She was protecting her own life in the only way available to her. The courtroom drama unfolded under the glare of global attention. In Dubai, debates erupted across television talk shows and social media. Women's rights organizations used the case as a rallying cry for stronger protections against domestic violence. Hashtags like #StandWithAmira and #JusticeForAmira trended regionally, while Indian media outlets ran headlines portraying Ravi as the wronged son taken too soon. The public was polarized. Supporters of Amira saw her as a symbol of women trapped in marriages where silence was demanded but safety never guaranteed. Critics, however, accused her of exploiting cultural narratives to excuse a deliberate killing. If she was in danger, one commentator wrote, "Why didn't she run? Why didn't she shout for help? Her silence is her confession." The trial was not without unexpected turns. At one point, prosecutors presented phone records showing Amira had called her mother in Sharjah 2 days before the incident. In that call, she reportedly expressed second thoughts about the marriage. The prosecution suggested this hinted at motive, perhaps even premeditation. The defense countered by framing it as a daughter seeking guidance in a troubled marriage, not a killer planning a crime. Another twist came when a hotel guest claimed, weeks after the incident, that he heard a woman crying out the night of the stabbing. Initially overlooked, his testimony became hotly debated. The prosecution dismissed it as unreliable memory, the defense insisted it corroborated Amira's account of being attacked. The security guard's decision not to intervene also became a focal point. While not a defendant, his hesitation was dissected both legally and publicly. Could the tragedy have been prevented had he knocked? Some believed his inaction indirectly sealed Ravi's fate, while others argued it changed nothing. For both families, the trial was devastating. Ravi's parents sat through testimony that painted their son in a troubling light, listening as friends and co-workers described him as controlling. They shook their heads, sometimes openly sobbing, as their child was cast in such terms. He was not a monster, his father insisted outside the courthouse. He loved her. He loved all of us. Amira's family, meanwhile, faced their own torment. Supporters of Ravi harassed them online, accusing them of raising a murderer. Yet her mother stood by her side, attending every hearing, her presence a quiet but resolute reminder that Amira was still someone's daughter. By the time closing arguments arrived, the case had grown larger than the individuals involved. It was no longer just about a couple in room 307. It was about how society viewed abuse, how courts interpreted self-defense in intimate relationships, and how culture influenced judgment. The prosecution urged the court not to be swayed by sympathy. This was a deliberate act, they repeated. Justice demands accountability. The defense pleaded for understanding. This is not the face of a murderer, they said, pointing at Amira. This is the face of a woman who ran out of options. The judge recessed, and the city waited. Whatever the verdict, it would echo far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The trial of Amira Khalid began in the Dubai criminal court under the glare of packed benches and constant media attention. From the first gavel strike, the atmosphere was electric. Journalists scribbled furiously, television crews waited outside for updates, and every word spoken inside seemed to echo far beyond the courthouse walls. The prosecution's first move was to call forensic experts. They described in meticulous detail the nature of Ravi's wound. One expert explained that the strike pierced directly into the heart, leaving almost no chance of survival. This was not a defensive nick or accidental graze, the prosecutor pressed. This was a fatal, targeted strike. The implication was clear: Amira hadn't swung blindly, she had meant to end Ravi's life. The defense countered by bringing in a trauma specialist, who argued that under conditions of extreme stress, people often act without precision or conscious aim. What may appear deliberate in hindsight, he explained, can in reality be the chaotic outcome of panic. Perhaps the most emotional testimony came from Ravi's parents. His mother took the stand clutching a framed photograph of her son, her voice breaking as she described him as a devoted child who had made sacrifices for his family. "He was our only son," she wept. "He wanted to make us proud. Now he is gone forever." Her grief reverberated through the courtroom, drawing tears even from spectators. But the defense had its own emotional arsenal. Amira's younger brother testified once more, recounting the cafe incident where Ravi gripped her wrist so tightly it left marks. "She brushed it off that day," he said, voice low, "but I saw her fear. I told her to leave him. She said it was too late." Friends of Amira also shared WhatsApp messages in which she confided her worries about Ravi's temper. One message, sent weeks before the wedding, read, "He loves me, but sometimes I'm afraid of his anger. Maybe things will get better after marriage." The defense leaned heavily on these words, framing them as a chilling foreshadowing of the hotel tragedy. Midway through the trial, prosecutors introduced phone records showing that Amira had called her mother in Sharjah just 2 days before the incident. In that call, she allegedly expressed regret about the marriage. The prosecution framed this as evidence of intent, that she had doubts and might have already considered drastic action. The defense fought back, presenting the call in a different light. This was not planning, Amira's lawyer argued. This was a daughter reaching out, desperate for advice, frightened about her future. Another dramatic moment came when prosecutors revealed blood pattern analysis suggesting Ravi may have been reclining on the bed when he was stabbed, not engaged in a violent struggle. "She attacked a defenseless man," the prosecutor declared. The defense disputed the interpretation, arguing that in moments of chaos, positions shift quickly and evidence can be misleading. Every session of the trial was charged with emotion. There were days when Ravi's father shouted in grief, demanding justice, and days when Amira herself broke down in tears, insisting she had no choice. At one point, she asked to address the court directly. "I did not want him to die," she said, voice trembling. "I only wanted to live." The prosecution dismissed her words as calculated, but her raw emotion left an impression on many in the gallery. Media reports only fueled the intensity. Some outlets painted Amira as a symbol of women fighting back against abuse, while others branded her as cold and manipulative. Talk shows debated the case endlessly. In Dubai's cafes and workplaces, the story became a constant topic of conversation. It wasn't just a trial, it was a cultural flashpoint. By the time closing arguments arrived, both sides had sharpened their narratives into starkly opposing stories. The prosecution stood firm. Amira Khalid did not act out of desperation. She acted with intent. A single, precise stab wound to the heart. Hours of silence afterward. This was not survival, it was a decision. And decisions have consequences. The defense appealed to the court's humanity. "You have heard her voice. You have seen her bruises. You have read her messages of fear. Do not punish her for finding the only way to stop a violent outburst. She is not a killer. She is a survivor." The judge listened intently, the weight of the case heavy in the silence that followed. After months of testimony and deliberation, the court delivered its verdict. The judge acknowledged evidence of Ravi's controlling behavior and accepted that Amira had endured abuse. However, he also ruled that her response exceeded reasonable self-defense. The charge of intentional homicide was reduced to manslaughter. Amira was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in a storm of reactions. Ravi's parents broke down in anguish, sobbing that the punishment was too lenient. "She took our only son," his mother cried. 7 years is nothing compared to a lifetime without him. On the other side, Amira's family wept with relief. For them, the conviction could have been far worse. Women's rights advocates called the ruling bittersweet, acknowledging the recognition of abuse but frustrated that it had not shielded her from a lengthy sentence. As the verdict spread across Dubai and beyond, the debates reignited. Supporters of Amira rallied under hashtags like #Justice for Amira, while critics accused the court of sending a dangerous message by reducing the charge. Some feared it would embolden others to take violent measures in marital disputes. For Amira, prison became a place of retreat. Reports suggested she kept to herself, reading often, and avoiding conflict. Visitors described her as subdued, but not broken. She lives with what happened every day, her lawyer later said. Her sentence is not only in prison walls but in her memory. For Ravi's family, the trial left a wound that would never close. They returned to India with his body and a sense of unfinished justice. His father told reporters, "We brought him up with love. We sent him abroad to prosper. He came back to us in a coffin. Nothing can make that right." For Dubai, the case became a lasting symbol. It sparked reforms in hotel security procedures, with guards instructed to intervene more decisively during noise complaints. It also fueled conversations about domestic violence, cultural clashes in marriages, and the limits of self-defense in law. Room 307 of the Al Noor Grand Hotel never shook its reputation. Some guests requested it out of morbid fascination, others refused to stay near it. Staff whispered that the air in the room felt heavy, no matter how many times it was refurbished. Years later, the tragedy still lingered as a cautionary tale. A story of two young lives colliding in love and ending in blood, leaving behind unanswered questions. Could it have been prevented? Was it murder, or survival? And how do you measure justice when love, fear, and violence are bound so tightly together? Thank you for staying with me through this difficult but important story. Cases like this remind us that behind the headlines are real people, real families, and real consequences. They also remind us of how fragile relationships can become when love is overshadowed by control, fear, and silence. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Amira acted out of survival, or do you feel the court was too lenient with its verdict? These cases are never simple, and your perspective matters. Drop your opinion below. I read every comment, and your insights add so much depth to our community discussions. Also, let me know where in the world you're watching from. Our audience is growing across so many countries, and it's powerful to see how stories like this connect people globally. Just type your city or country in the comments section. I'd love to see it. If this story made you think, don't forget to give the video a like. Share it with someone who follows true crime, and subscribe if you haven't already. We release new episodes that dive into stories you won't hear anywhere else, and your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and thank you again for being part of this journey.